I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near that beach path. Let me say that again so it lands the way it should. If my work tablet hadn't died during the afternoon session, none of what I am about to tell you would have happened. I would have packed up my bag, gone back to my hotel room, ordered something from the menu, and woken up the next morning the exact same person I was the day before. But my tablet died. And a colleague mentioned the beachside lounge at the far end of the resort had charging points near the back wall. So I grabbed my bag and went looking. That one small decision pulled a thread that unraveled 2 years of careful, quiet, very deliberate self-control. My name is Liam Carver. I am 29 years old. I work as a corporate risk analyst at Voss Meridian Group, a mid-sized strategy and consulting firm based in Seattle. I have worked there for 2 years and 3 months. I am good at my job. I keep detailed notes. I show up early. I do not make problems and I do not cause scenes. I am the kind of person that managers describe as reliable and dependable, which sounds like a compliment until you realize those words mean you are useful but not surprising. I had spent 2 years being useful and not surprising. I was very good at it. I pushed through the wooden gate at the side of the resort, stepped onto the sun-warmed boardwalk, and stopped walking. Not because I chose to stop. My legs just quit. Renata Voss was lying on a lounger not 15 feet in front of me. Eyes closed, wearing a white one-piece swimsuit, one arm hanging loose off the side of the chair. The afternoon light was hitting the water behind her at an angle that made the whole scene look like something from a magazine. And I just stood there, holding my dead tablet, staring. Here is what you need to understand about Renata Voss before I go any further. She is the founder and managing director of Voss Meridian Group. She built the company from 2 clients and a borrowed desk in a shared office space into a firm of 55 people that is respected across the Pacific Northwest. She is 41 years old. She is 12 years older than me. She has auburn hair cropped short on the sides with the length left loosely on top, and when she walks into a room, she walks like someone who already knows where she is going and exactly how long it will take to get there. I had sat across from her in 47 meetings over 2 years. 47 because I kept notes and the number stuck. In every single one of those 47 meetings, she was sharp and focused and professional in a way that made the air around her feel slightly more organized than the air in the rest of the room. I had never once seen her look the way she looked on that lounger. Unguarded, soft around the edges, like the person she was before she learned to walk into rooms like she owned the air inside them. I watched her breathe. I am not proud of that. But I stood there and I watched and I thought about how I had spent 2 years telling myself that what I noticed whenever she walked in was professional admiration. That it was a completely normal thing to feel for someone you respected. That it meant nothing beyond that. I had almost convinced myself. My right foot had already started moving backward when she spoke. She still had not opened her eyes. Taking in the view, Liam? Her voice was calm, unbothered. Like she had known I was standing there the entire time. What came out of my mouth next did not go through any filter or review process. It arrived without warning in a voice that was about 30% too honest for a company retreat, and I said something I had no business saying out loud. 3 full seconds of silence followed. Then she turned her head and looked at me with an expression I have been trying to find the right word for ever since. It was not surprise. It was not amusement exactly. It was something slower than both of those things. Something that seemed to be deciding what it wanted to become. She held my gaze for a moment that felt much longer than it actually was. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Just the edge of a smile. Not a full one. Just enough to make everything feel more complicated. And then she looked back at the water like I had said nothing at all. No reply. No correction. No acknowledgement that anything had just passed between us. She closed her eyes again, and the sound of the waves filled the space where her response should have been. I found a chair near the far end of the boardwalk lounge, plugged in my tablet, and spent the next 40 minutes staring at a document I did not read. Not a single word. She left before I did. I heard her stand up, heard the soft sound of her sandals on the wooden boards, and I kept my eyes on my screen the entire time. I did not look up. I told myself that was the right call. I told myself the whole thing would dissolve by morning, the way awkward moments at work retreats usually do. But here is the part that stayed with me on the walk back to my room. She had known I was there. She had said my name before I said a single word, which meant she had heard me come through that gate. She had heard my footsteps on the boards. She had known the entire time I was standing there, and she had waited. She had waited, and then she had chosen to speak first. I sat on the edge of my hotel bed without turning the lights on. Outside the window, the ocean was doing what oceans do at dusk, steady and indifferent and completely unbothered by the fact that I had just said something out loud that I had spent 2 years carefully keeping inside my chest. I replayed her expression, the edge of that smile, the way she looked back at the water like she was keeping something for herself. I told myself it meant nothing. I did not sleep well that night. The retreat ended 2 days later. We shared a table at the final group dinner, and she talked easily with the rest of the team, laughed at the right moments, steered the conversation the way she always did, like someone quietly adjusting the sails of a boat without anyone noticing the wind had shifted. She did not bring up the beach. She did not treat me differently than she treated anyone else at that table. And I sat there watching all of it and thought very clearly that I was in a great deal of trouble. We flew back to Seattle on a Friday morning. I carried my bag through the terminal and told myself that what happened on that boardwalk was a small thing. A moment, a slip, nothing that needed to mean anything at all. Almost. Seattle in October has a specific kind of quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the kind that sits on your shoulders. Gray sky, wet streets, the sound of rain on office windows while you are trying to concentrate on something that keeps slipping away from you. That was the backdrop for the 2 weeks that followed the retreat. I came in early. I stayed focused. I was, by every visible measure, completely fine. I was not completely fine. It started with the Whitmore file. I was at my desk on a Wednesday afternoon, about 10 days after we got back, when her name appeared on my screen. Not a scheduled meeting, just a message. Short and direct the way all her messages were. She wanted a second read on the risk section before the Friday presentation. My office at 4. I read it twice. Then I typed back one word. Sure. Then I sat and looked at the screen for a moment longer than I needed to. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. We went through the file section by section. She asked sharp questions. I gave careful answers. And at no point did either of us mention a beach or a boardwalk or a sentence that had arrived without permission in the middle of a sunny afternoon. It was professional. It was normal. And when she stood to leave, she paused at the door and said the risk section needs a cleaner line of reasoning before Friday. Can you rework it tonight? I said yes. She nodded and left. I reworked it that night. She sent back 2 lines at 9:30. Good. Use this structure going forward. That was it. I stared at those 2 words longer than I should have. Then 10 days after that, another late meeting. Different file, different question, same 4 o'clock timing. And then again the week after. I started to notice the pattern without meaning to. The conversations would begin on the work, clean and focused, and then somewhere in the middle, without either of us steering them there, they would drift somewhere else. She asked me once how I ended up in risk analysis specifically, out of everything I could have chosen. I gave her the honest answer, that I had always been good at seeing the places where things were about to break before they actually broke. That it seemed like a useful thing to be good at. She looked at me for a moment and then said that was more self-aware than she expected. I could not tell if it was a compliment. I thought about it for 3 days. I started learning things about her that were not in any company profile. She had built Voss Meridian over 12 years, starting with almost nothing. She drank green tea without honey but coffee with exactly 1 sugar. She had a younger brother in Montreal she called every Friday evening. When something genuinely surprised her into laughing, the laugh came out low and slightly startled, like she had not given herself permission for it. She pressed her thumbnail lightly against her lower lip when she was working through something hard. I had first noticed that habit 38 meetings ago and had spent 38 meetings telling myself it was just something I happened to observe. I had run out of ways to tell myself that. Then one Thursday morning, a name appeared in a company-wide email that made something shift before I had even finished reading it. Direk Hale, Senior Partner, Eastern Regional Office, arriving for a portfolio integration review. Nothing in that email should have meant anything to me personally, but something about the way it was worded, formal and slightly careful, made me read it twice. He arrived on a Thursday. By Friday, it was already clear to anyone paying attention that Derek Hale and Renata Voss knew each other in a way that had nothing to do with the current assignment. I was paying attention. He stopped by her office twice before noon on his first full day. She smiled at something he said in a way that was different from her professional smile. Warmer, more familiar, like a smile that had a history behind it. During a group briefing that afternoon, he rested his hand briefly on the back of her chair. It was a small gesture. Most people in the room probably did not even register it. I registered it, and then I spent the rest of that briefing telling myself to stop registering things that were none of my business. 3 weeks passed. The late afternoon meetings continued. The conversations still drifted. But something had shifted in a way I could not fully name. She was slightly more careful. Not cold, just precise. Like someone who had recalibrated the distance between 2 points without explaining why. Then came the Tuesday night that made everything land differently. We were the last 2 people in the office. A client had pushed a deadline forward by 3 days, and the rest of the team had filtered out one by one until it was just the 2 of us at opposite ends of the conference table with takeout containers going cold and too many open documents. The city was dark and wet outside the windows. She had taken her jacket off and rolled her sleeves up, and she was going through a section with a pen, making small marks in the margin, thumbnail pressed to her lip. I watched her do it. She looked up and caught me. "What?" she said. "Not sharp. Just direct." "Nothing," I said. "You have been quiet all evening." "I am always quiet. Not like this." I set my pen down. I had not planned what came next. It arrived the same way the sentence on the boardwalk had arrived, without asking for clearance. I said, "How long has Derek been part of the picture?" The room changed in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. She looked at me with the steady, unhurried look she used when she was making a decision. Not a quick glance. The real one. Then she said, "That is an interesting question for someone who has a different question sitting underneath it." I did not answer. She closed the document in front of her and said we should finish this tonight. We did. We finished it and said goodnight the way 2 colleagues say goodnight, clean and unremarkable. I rode the elevator down alone and walked to my car in the rain and sat in the driver's seat for a long time without going anywhere. On the drive home, I did not replay what she said. I replayed what she identified, the question she had named out loud that I had not asked, the one she had seen sitting underneath all the words I had actually spoken. She had looked straight through everything I had carefully arranged and called it by its real name without blinking. And the worst part was, she had not looked surprised. Some mornings you wake up and something already feels off before you can explain why. Not a sound. Not a message. Just a heaviness sitting in your chest that your brain has not caught up to yet. That was the feeling I had 4 days after that Tuesday night in the office. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, and told myself I was being dramatic. I got up, made coffee, and checked my phone. A calendar notification had come in at 7:04. Leadership alignment call. 8 o'clock. My name was on the invite list. I dialed in 2 minutes early. The call had already been running for 4 minutes. I caught the tail end of something, a slide being referenced, a number being discussed, and then I heard Derek's voice. Steady. Unhurried. The voice of someone who had already made up his mind before the meeting started. He said, "The Liam position. I know there is some sensitivity around it, Renata, but the restructure does not balance unless we cut at the analyst tier, and his role is the one that makes the most sense on paper." A beat of silence followed. Then a direct message popped up on my screen from a staff coordinator. "Liam, you were not supposed to be on this one. Dropping you now." The line went dead. I sat at my kitchen counter and did not move for a long time. My coffee went cold. Outside, Seattle was doing what it does in late autumn. Low gray clouds pressed down against the buildings. Rain on the window, the kind of morning that makes everything feel slightly heavier than it actually is. I kept turning that phrase over in my mind. Some sensitivity around it. I knew what it meant. I knew exactly what it meant. And I knew that Derek had meant for those words to land exactly the way they did. I got dressed slowly. Drove to the office without the radio on. When I stepped off the elevator, Petra, Renata's assistant, looked up from her desk and then immediately looked back down. Not quickly enough. She knew something. I went to my office, opened my laptop, and stared at the screen for 20 minutes without doing anything useful. Then I stood up, walked down the hall, and knocked on Renata's door. Come in. She was standing at the window, not sitting at her desk, not on a call. Just standing with her arms crossed loosely at her waist, looking down at the street below. She turned when I stepped inside, and I saw something on her face I had never seen in 2 years of working closely with her. Not panic, not guilt. Something older and heavier than either of those things. Something that looked like a person who had been carrying a weight they had not told anyone about and had just watched it become impossible to hide. Sit down, Liam, she said quietly. He sat. She did not sit. She moved to her desk and rested both hands on the back of her chair like she needed something solid to hold on to. And then she told me everything. Not the professional version. The real one. Derek Hale had not arrived at Voss Meridian by accident. 3 years before, in the Eastern office, they had been in a serious relationship. Long enough that she had made choices around it she would not have made otherwise. When it ended, she left. She came to Seattle and built everything here from nothing, partly because she needed something that belonged entirely to her with no overlap and no shadow from that time. When his name appeared on the integration review, she had flagged a conflict to the parent company. They noted it. They sent him anyway. Since arriving, Derek had been watching. He was smart and thorough, and he noticed things. The late meetings. The way the team talked about the two of us in the same breath. 2 weeks before that call, he had come to her directly. Create visible distance, he told her, or he would raise a formal conduct concern with the board. She had agreed. Not because she wanted to, because she was trying to protect me. Every meeting that ended a minute earlier than it should have. Every conversation that pulled back before it got somewhere real. Every door I had watched quietly close over the past few weeks and told myself was just the natural shape of a professional relationship. None of it was what I thought. She had been absorbing the cost of all of it without telling me a single thing about why. Then she looked away from me, toward the window, and said it quietly enough that it almost got lost in the sound of rain against the glass. I want you to know that none of what I did was easy, because I have thought about you every single day since that afternoon on the boardwalk. Every day. And most of those days I spent arguing with myself about it. The room went completely still. I looked at her, at the auburn hair and the careful posture and the expression of someone who had just said something they could not take back and was waiting to see what it did to the air between them. I felt something lock up in my chest. Some old practice part of me that knew how to stand up and walk away from things before they got close enough to cost anything. That part moved my legs before I made a conscious decision to use them. I said thank you for telling me. I stood up, and I left. I know exactly how that sounds. I knew it then too. But the habit of retreat runs deep when you have been practicing it for years. I walked 3 blocks in the rain without a jacket and told myself I had made the right call. That is usually a sign that you have not made the right call at all. For days past, I did my work. I answered emails. I was, from the outside, completely steady. On the 4th day, Derek came to my office at 10 in the morning, closed the door behind him, and sat down across from my desk with the relaxed posture of someone delivering news they had already made peace with. He told me my position had been identified for elimination in the upcoming restructure. End of month. Standard severance. Positive reference. No reflection on my performance. He said it like he was doing me a courtesy by telling me in person. I said thank you. I still cannot explain why that was the word my mouth produced. He nodded and left. I sat in my chair for 60 seconds. Then I picked up my things, walked down the hallway, and knocked on her door for the 2nd time in 4 days. She looked up from her desk, and I could see before I said a single word that she already knew. She had been carrying it since before I walked through the door. I sat down without being asked. Did you fight it? I said. A long pause filled the room. I was not in the room where the final decision was made, she said. And the way she said it told me more about what that had cost her than any longer answer could have. I nodded slowly. I looked at her the way I had been carefully avoiding for 2 years. Then I stood. I will be out by end of month, I said. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. I watched the numbers count down and told myself I was fine. I was not even close to fine. 3 things happened in the 5 days after I left her office for the second time. First, I went home and sat at my kitchen table until past midnight without eating anything. Second, I started quietly getting my desk ready to be cleared. And third, at 12:17 in the morning on the second day, my phone lit up on the nightstand. I picked it up. It was from Renata. Said, "I resigned this evening. I needed you to know that what existed between us is not something I am willing to let him reduce to a footnote. I am sorry I did not say this sooner. I am sorry I let it get this far." I read it 4 times. Then I set the phone face down and lay in the dark listening to the rain, thinking about every moment I had been standing close enough to say something real and had chosen not to. She was gone before I arrived the next morning. Her office had been cleared sometime before 8. The glass walls were bare. The single shelf behind her chair held nothing. Petra told me she had come in early and finished in under an hour. I stood in the doorway for a moment looking at the empty room. The desk was completely clear. The small plant that used to sit near the window was gone. It looked like no one had ever worked there. I went back to my desk and finished out my remaining days with the kind of focused concentration that is really just a way of not thinking about something that is taking up all the available space in your mind. I cleaned out my own desk on a Friday afternoon. It did not take long. 2 years at a company and everything fit into one cardboard box. A mug, a framed photo from a team event, 2 books I had never gotten around to taking home, a spare charging cable. Petra hugged me on the way out and did not say anything, which was exactly the right thing to do. I rode the elevator down, pushed through the lobby doors, and stepped out onto a wet Seattle sidewalk holding that box, feeling the particular quiet that follows the end of something you had not fully admitted mattered to you until it was already gone. I drove home, made dinner I did not taste, sat at my kitchen table and stayed there until almost midnight. What I kept returning to was not the job or the severance or what came next professionally. What I kept returning to was a simple and uncomfortable truth I had been avoiding for a long time. I had spent my entire adult life standing slightly back from the edge of anything real. I had told myself that was wisdom, that it was the sensible lesson of someone who had watched a company fold under him early in his career and learned not to trust stability. But sitting alone at that table, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was not wisdom. It was a habit I had dressed up as wisdom. And that habit had just cost me something I was not willing to accept losing. Saturday morning I called my former colleague Patrick, who knew people the way some people know city streets, thoroughly and with a good memory for which roads connect where. I told him I was looking for Renata. Not in a strange way, I said. He told me not to qualify it. He made 2 calls and phoned me back in under 20 minutes. She had set up a small rented office in the East Lake neighborhood and was doing independent consulting work. She stopped most mornings at a cafe called Harbor Line near the water before heading in. She was, from what he had heard, doing well and building something new. I sat with that for the rest of Saturday and most of Sunday. On Sunday evening, I stopped arguing with myself. Monday morning, I drove to East Lake. Harbor Line was a narrow, warm room with fogged windows and the steady low hum of a place that takes its regulars seriously. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, and the first thing I saw was the corner table by the window. She was there, a notebook open in front of her, a cup of tea to one side, her laptop open, reading something with the focused stillness she brought to everything. Her auburn hair caught the pale light coming through the glass. She had not seen me yet. I walked over and stopped beside the table. She looked up slowly. Neither of us said anything for a moment. She searched my face the way she always did when she was deciding something. Not quickly, not nervously, with complete and unhurried attention. Then she closed her laptop. "Sit down, Liam," he said. And this time I did not let the old habit move my legs before I was ready. I spoke first. I told her I had left her office twice when I had something real to say and had said nothing both times. I told her I was not doing that again. I told her I had meant every word on that boardwalk the afternoon my tablet died, and that I had meant it every single day between then and now. I told her the timing was a mess and neither of us had a clean path forward, and I did not care about that. I said I had spent my whole life being careful and it had never once given me anything worth keeping. That I wanted the real version of whatever this was, not the version that was safe enough to walk away from without a scratch. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the cafe window, the water was visible between the buildings, gray and steady in the way that Seattle mornings in late autumn always are. Then something in her expression shifted. Not dramatically, just a small, quiet movement, like something that had been held tightly for too long finally being allowed to ease. She told me she had been writing a business plan. A real one. Her own firm, smaller than Voss Meridian, built the way she had always wanted to build something if she were starting entirely from scratch. 2 clients already interested before she had even finished the plan. She said she was not standing still. She had a direction. What she did not have, she said, was a reason to keep arguing herself out of the one thing that had made the most sense to her in longer than she wanted to admit. She looked at her tea, then back at me. You came to a cafe on a Monday morning to tell me you meant what you said on a boardwalk 6 months ago. Yes, I said. That is either very sure or very reckless. I have spent my whole life being sure and careful, I said. I would like to try something different. She smiled. Not the edge of one. Not the version she used in conference rooms. The full one, unheld and unguarded. The one I had only ever caught in pieces before and never long enough to keep. Then she reached across the table and turned her hand over, palm facing up. I put my hand in hers. It was a small thing, quiet thing, but it was the most honest thing I had done in as long as I could measure, and I felt it the way you feel things that are actually real. Not like a rush, like something settling into the exact space it was always meant to fill. We stayed at that table for 2 hours. We talked about her new firm and my next steps and the particular difficulty of building something from the ground up when the cautious version of yourself keeps offering directions you no longer want to follow. We disagreed about 2 things and agreed about 6 others and laughed once in a way neither of us could have explained to anyone who was not sitting right there. When we finally stood to leave, she looked over at me with the same expression I had first seen on a sun-warmed boardwalk with a dead tablet in my hands. The one I had never found a single clean word for. For what it is worth, she said. I knew you were going to say something real that afternoon before you even opened your mouth. Something about the way you stopped walking. She paused. I was glad you did. We walked out into the Monday morning together. And for the first time in a long time, I did not look back.